Jacob had always loved Sunday mornings. For him, it was the only time the world felt slow and gentle. The sky outside his window glowed orange as the sun pushed itself above the horizon. His old dog, Max, slept peacefully at his feet, tail twitching, now and then as if chasing something in a dream. Inside the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. Jacob had baked it the night before, just like he always did on weekends. He poured himself a mug of steaming coffee, the strong, dark kind he had carried on long deployments overseas. It tasted like home. For a man who had spent most of his life in deserts and jungles with bullets snapping overhead, peace was a rare gift. And this morning, Jacob felt lucky enough to have it. He leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip, and thought, maybe finally, life is going to be quiet. But quiet didn't last. It started with a sound so sudden, so violent, that Max leapt to his feet, barking like the world was ending. A thunderous bang shook the walls, rattling the picture frames, making the coffee in Jacob's mug slosh over the rim. Before he could even stand, it happened again. Bang! The front door shuddered under the force, and then it wasn't a door anymore. The wood splintered and cracked, bursting inward as a boot smashed through. The hinges gave way, the frame screamed, and the door slammed against the floor in pieces. Jacob froze in disbelief. His heart pounded. His mind jumped back to faraway places, ambushes, raids, enemies breaking down doors. But this wasn't a war zone. This was his home. Max barked furiously, his growls deep and raw. But Jacob snapped his fingers and the dog backed away, confused but loyal. Through the broken doorway stormed men in dark uniforms. They weren't police, not military, not government. Their clothes looked official but wrong. Black boots, black jackets, big white letters across the chest. HOA compliance. One of them raised his voice like a commander on a battlefield. "You're in violation," he barked. Another pointed at Jacob as though he were a criminal. "Non-compliance with Code 14B. Immediate enforcement authorized." Jacob's eyes widened. He had fought against men with guns, men who would have killed him without hesitation. But these weren't soldiers. These were neighbors. Neighbors with cheap badges and clipboards who thought they had power. He stood, fists clenched. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my house?" His voice cracked with anger. But they didn't answer. They spread out, storming through the living room, knocking over a lamp, shoving aside his small table, ignoring the terrified barking of Max. One man taped a bright orange slip to the wall like a victory flag. Another snapped photos of his furniture, his windows, his fence visible through the back door. "Violation of community standards," one of them said, almost gleeful. "Trash bin not stored within 24 hours. Fence exceeds height regulation by 2 inches. Unauthorized paint color for exterior trim. Multiple offenses." Jacob felt heat rise in his chest. "You smashed my door for this?" The leader of the group smirked, eyes cold. "Sir, rules are rules. Failure to comply means fines and further action." The words sliced through Jacob like a blade. This was his home, his safe place. He had carried brothers bleeding across sand, buried friends wrapped in flags, and endured nightmares so his neighbors could sleep in peace. And now? His own neighborhood had declared war on him, over a trash can, over a fence, over flowers, in the wrong place. When the men finally stormed back out, they left wreckage behind. His door lay broken, his table overturned, the orange violation notice flapping in the breeze. Jacob stood in the silence, chest heaving, fists shaking. Max whimpered, at his feet, pressing close for comfort. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Jacob didn't feel like a warrior. He didn't feel strong. He felt small, humiliated. And yet, deep in his chest, something stirred. Not fear, not defeat. Something older, something harder. Because men could take his door, his money, his peace. But they could not take his pride, and Jacob knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The silence after they left was heavier than the noise of their boots. Jacob stood in the middle of his living room, staring at the broken doorway. His heart was still pounding, but now it wasn't from shock. It was from anger. The air smelled like dust and splintered wood. The orange violation slip flapped on the wall, mocking him like a flag of surrender. Max whined softly, nudging Jacob's hand with his wet nose as if reminding him he wasn't alone. But Jacob felt alone, more alone than he had felt in years. He slowly sat down on the edge of the couch, his body heavy as if the weight of the whole world had dropped on his shoulders. His hands trembled. He had been trained to stay calm under fire, to think clearly when bullets cracked the air. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this. Not this. Not men smashing into his home over flowers, fences, and garbage cans. Outside, he could hear whispers. His neighbors had been watching. He saw a curtain twitch across the street. Another window closed quickly. They had seen everything. The mighty war hero standing powerless as a group of men with cheap uniforms and printed badges treated him like dirt. For years, these same neighbors had waved at him, smiled, thanked him for his service. Some even saluted him jokingly. And now? They only peeked from behind glass, too afraid or too entertained to come close. Jacob's jaw tightened. Humiliation burned hotter than anger. He walked to the broken door and picked up the violation notice. His eyes moved across the words, but they blurred from the heat in his chest. Fence too high. Trash violation. Paint color unapproved. Fine. $5,000, $5,000. For this. He crumpled the paper in his fist but then stopped. No, he needed to keep it. It was proof. Evidence. He dropped it on the table and sat back down. His eyes were drawn to a photo hanging on the wall, tilted from the chaos. It was him and his old SEAL team. Young men in desert gear, smiling despite the heat and dirt. Men who had bled and laughed beside him. Men who had held him when he cried after battles. Men who had buried their brothers and still marched on. Jacob closed his eyes. He remembered carrying wounded friends through sandstorms, kicking in doors, where real danger waited, facing enemies who wanted him dead. He had faced all of that. But this was different. He opened his eyes again and looked around. His house felt smaller. His chest felt tighter. He realized what had been taken from him. It wasn't just his door. It wasn't just money. It was dignity. These men had stripped him of it. They had treated him like nothing. Like his service, his sacrifice, his life meant less than a rule book about fences and trash cans. His fists curled. His teeth ground together. Max let out a low growl as if he could feel Jacob's storm rising. Jacob stood up. He walked through the wrecked doorway and looked at the street. Some neighbors were still watching, pretending they weren't. He didn't care. He let them see his eyes. Eyes that weren't broken. Eyes that still burned with the fire of a soldier. He turned back inside, breathing deep, trying to calm himself. He knew if he let his anger control him, he'd end up doing something reckless. That wasn't who he was. He wasn't just muscle. He was discipline. But inside him, something had changed. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just humiliated. He was determined. He looked again at the photo of his SEAL brothers, men who had always stood by him, no matter the cost. Men who never left one of their own behind. Jacob whispered under his breath, his voice low but steady. They picked the wrong man. The violation slip fluttered on the table in the draft from the broken door like it was daring him to act. And Jacob knew he would. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, Jacob lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, but his mind was wide awake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the broken door. He heard the boots slamming across his floor. He felt the humiliation crawling under his skin. Max lay beside him, breathing slow and heavy, but Jacob's chest was tight. Sleep would not come. The silence of the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt hollow. He turned over and saw the photo, frame on his nightstand. It was the same picture from the wall, smaller but powerful. His SEAL team, standing shoulder to shoulder, arms thrown around each other, dusty and tired, but smiling. Brothers. Jacob reached out and touched the glass, his finger brushing over the faces. He whispered their names one by one, men he hadn't seen in years but still carried in his heart. Some had died, some had disappeared into quiet lives, but some were still out there. His throat tightened. He had never been the kind of man to ask for help. On missions, he was the one pulling others out of fire, carrying them when they couldn't walk, keeping their spirits alive when the world wanted to break them. He was the strong one, the shield. But now, for the first time, he felt like the one who needed saving. He sat up, rubbed his face with his hands, and walked to the closet. At the very back, behind old uniforms and boxes of medals he never cared to show, was a wooden trunk. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside were memories, dog tags, old letters, photos, and on top of it all, a black satellite phone. Jacob stared at it. He hadn't touched it in years. The phone was a lifeline, a direct line to the men he once trusted with his life. Using it meant crossing a line. It meant pulling his brothers back into his fight. He picked it up slowly. His hand shook, but not from fear, from the weight of the decision. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, as if he sensed something important was happening. Jacob turned the phone on. The screen glowed faintly in the darkness. He scrolled through the contacts. Names, coded in short, simple words only the team would understand. His thumb hovered over one name, the man they used to call Grizzly, big, quiet, unshakable. If anyone would answer, it would be him. Jacob pressed call. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice, rough and deep, filled the silence. Yeah? Jacob froze for a moment. His mouth went dry. Hearing that voice pulled him straight back to dusty camps and fire-lit nights. It's me, Jacob said quietly. His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. A pause. Then the voice grew sharper. Jacob, brother, it's been years. Yeah, Jacob said. He swallowed hard. I wouldn't call unless it mattered, but I need you, I need the team. There was no hesitation on the other end, only silence that carried weight. Then steady as stone came the reply. Where and when? Jacob's chest tightened. Relief and guilt crashed together inside him. His eyes burned. It's the HOA, he said, almost laughing at how absurd it sounded. They broke into my home, smashed my door, treated me like nothing. Chaw? The voice repeated, disbelieving. Then, low and dangerous. Doesn't matter. Your family. We're coming. Jacob closed his eyes. For the first time since the invasion, he felt a piece of his strength return. Thank you, brother, he whispered. Don't thank me, came the reply. Thank us when this is done, I'll get the others. Sit tight. The call ended, but Jacob kept the phone in his hand, staring at it like it was a lifeline. He set it down gently on the table, then leaned back in his chair. Max rested his head on Jacob's knee, sensing the storm ahead. Jacob stroked the dog's fur, his voice soft but certain. They think they broke me, Max, but they don't know who I have. For the first time that day, Jacob smiled. Not a smile of peace, not a smile of joy, but a smile of war. Because his brothers were coming. And this time, the fight would be on his terms. The next morning, Jacob woke to the sound of tires crunching on gravel. For a moment he thought it was the HOA coming back and his chest tightened. But when he stepped outside, blinking into the bright sunlight, what he saw made his heart beat in a different way. A dark pickup truck rolled to a stop by his broken fence. The door opened and a huge figure stepped out. Broad shoulders, beard streaked with gray, eyes that carried weight but also warmth. Grizzly, Jacob whispered. The man grinned, showing a flash of white teeth beneath the beard. Heard you needed me, brother. Before Jacob could reply, Grizzly wrapped him in a bear hug so tight it nearly lifted him off the ground. For a moment, Jacob felt like a younger man again, safe in the arms of family. Then another truck pulled in behind, and another. Soon the quiet street was filling with familiar faces. One by one, men climbed out, each different in build, age, and scars, but all the same in spirit. Echo, Reaper, Doc, Blaze. Names spoken not in formality, but in brotherhood. Jacob's throat tightened. He hadn't seen some of them in years. But time didn't matter. The bond they shared was stronger than distance, stronger than silence. It was the kind of bond only war could forge. They gathered in his backyard, sitting on overturned crates, leaning against the old fence, sharing brief handshakes that always turned into embraces. Max, sensing the energy, wagged his tail furiously, moving from one man to the next as if greeting old friends. Jacob told them everything. His voice shook at first, shame lingering in his chest, but his brothers listened without judgment. He described the smashed door, the shouting, the humiliation of neighbors watching while HOA cops treated him like nothing. When he finished, silence filled the air. The kind of silence that was louder than words. Finally, Echo leaned forward, his sharp eyes burning. "They did that to you? To Jacob?" Doc shook his head slowly, disbelief etched in his face. "All those years, all that service, and this is how they treat you? Over a trash can?" Blaze spat in the dirt, his jaw tight. "Rules don't give them the right to break into a man's home. That's not compliance. That's abuse." Jacob lowered his gaze. "I didn't call you here to fight my battles, I just—" Grizzly cut him off, his deep voice steady as stone. "Stop. You think you're alone in this? You never were, you never will be. Brotherhood doesn't end when the war does." The others nodded. Reaper leaned back, his smile dangerous. "Besides, it's been a long time since we paid anyone a proper visit." For the first time in days, Jacob laughed. It was short, rough, but real. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Not reckless ones, not violent. These were men of discipline, men who knew power wasn't always about fists. They studied the HOA, pulled up maps, searched records. The building wasn't a fortress. It was just an office with people hiding behind paper rules. But for Jacob and his brothers, it was more than that. It was a symbol of arrogance, of people who thought they could crush others without consequence. As the sun dipped lower, painting the yard in gold, Jacob looked around at the faces of his team. For the first time since that door came crashing down, he didn't feel weak. He didn't feel humiliated. He felt strong, because he wasn't alone anymore. When night came, they lit a small fire in the backyard. They sat around it, sharing old stories, their laughter carrying into the night. Neighbors peeked again, curious, but Jacob didn't care. Let them look. This was his family. His real family. And tomorrow, his family would stand with him. The morning came quiet and cold. A thin layer of fog lay over the neighborhood, softening the streets, hiding the houses like shadows. But inside Jacob's home, there was no fog, only focus. The men moved with the calm of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times. They weren't in uniform, not anymore, but the way they carried themselves was unmistakable. Straight backs, sharp eyes, every movement precise. Jacob stood at the window, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. His door was still broken, but today, he didn't see it as a wound. He saw it as a reason. Behind him, Grizzly adjusted his jacket. Blaze tightened the laces on his boots. Doc packed a small bag, not with weapons but with folders, photos, and a stack of printed laws they had dug up the night before. Information was their ammunition now. "Ready?" Echo asked quietly. Jacob nodded. His chest was heavy but steady. "Let's end this." They left the house together, a line of men who didn't need to speak to know they were united. Max barked once as they stepped off the porch, almost like a salute. The walk to the trucks was slow, deliberate. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, again whispering, pointing. But the stares didn't matter anymore. Jacob didn't feel shame this time. He felt pride. He felt power, not because of anger, but because of the men at his side. The engines rumbled to life. 4 trucks rolled out of the neighborhood, carrying men who had once crossed oceans and deserts together, men who had once stormed compounds, rescued hostages, and faced death with nothing but trust in each other. Now their destination was not a battlefield in a foreign land. It was a plain brick building with a polished sign. Homeowners Association. Headquarters. It looked harmless. Too harmless, like a fox hiding in sheep's clothing. They parked across the street. The team stepped out one by one, boots striking the pavement. No words were spoken. They didn't need a speech. Their presence alone was enough. Jacob looked at the building, his jaw tight. Memories of the smashed door rushed back. His dog barking. His neighbors staring, his humiliation. But when he turned his head and saw his brothers, the weight lifted. He wasn't walking in alone. They crossed the street together, a wall of calm strength. People outside smoking or scrolling their phones froze mid-breath, eyes widening at the sight of them. Inside, the lobby was bright and sterile. A receptionist looked up startled as the group entered. Clipboards, phones, and papers scattered across desks as employees stopped what they were doing to stare. Can I help you?" the receptionist stammered. Jacob stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. "Yes. I'm here about a violation." Whispers rippled across the room. Someone dropped a pen. Someone else pushed back their chair. The air grew heavy, as if the building itself knew something was about to change. One man in a suit hurried forward, adjusting his tie nervously. "Sir, if you have an issue, you need to—" Grizzly's eyes locked on him, cold and unblinking. The man froze mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. Jacob reached into his jacket and pulled out the orange violation slip, unfolding it slowly, letting it tremble in the air like a flag. He held it out in front of him. "This," he said, voice steady, "is what you thought was worth smashing into a man's home. This is what you thought justified humiliation." The room was silent. No one moved. Blaze leaned close to one of the staffers, his voice low but dangerous. "You kicked down the wrong man's door." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. The board members who had once acted untouchable now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their confidence cracking under the stares of men who had seen real battle. For the first time, the HOA realized they weren't the ones in control anymore. The HOA board sat around a long polished table, their expensive suits and fake authority shining under the bright office lights. Behind them hung framed certificates, rules printed in gold letters and pictures of smiling families, images meant to show order and power. But when Jacob and his team walked into that room, the power shifted instantly. The SEALs didn't shout. They didn't wave fists. They simply walked in and sat down across from the board. The silence was heavy, so heavy that even the ticking of the wall clock sounded loud. The chairman, a thin man with slick hair, cleared his throat nervously. This is highly irregular. You cannot simply storm into a private board meeting." Grizzly leaned forward, his massive frame filling the space. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer. "Funny, that's exactly what you did to Jacob's home." The man flinched. Jacob placed the crumpled violation slip on the table. His hand trembled, but not from fear. His anger was steady now, sharp like a blade. "You kicked down my door," Jacob said quietly. "You scared my dog. You treated me like a criminal in front of my neighbors. And you did all of it. Over a trash can and a fence." One of the board members tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Sir, rules must be enforced. We have authority." "Under authority?" Blaze cut him off, his voice rising. "Real authority is earned. It's not printed on a clipboard. It's not in a fine. Authority is standing beside men in fire, knowing they'll die for you if they have to. That's authority." The room fell silent again. Doc reached into his bag and pulled out the folder. He slid it across the table. Inside were printed laws, pages highlighted and marked. "We looked into your so-called powers," he said. "You've been overstepping for years. Illegal fines, harassment, threats, breaking into homes. You're not enforcing rules. You're running a racket." The chairman's face turned pale. Sweat began to form on his forehead. That's not true." Echo leaned forward, his eyes sharp as knives. "It's all documented, and we've already made copies. If you don't fix this now, every single neighbor you've bullied will see the truth. And so will the law. The board shifted uncomfortably, their false confidence slipping away piece by piece. Jacob's voice broke the silence again, steady but heavy with emotion. I served this country so people could feel safe in their homes. I bled so families could have peace. And the first time in years I tried to live quietly, you bring war to my doorstep. He leaned closer, his eyes burning. That ends today. No, one argued. No one could. The SEAL's presence was too much. These weren't just angry neighbors. These were men who had lived through battles far worse than paperwork and petty fines, and the board knew, if they pushed, they would lose. Finally, the chairman swallowed hard and lowered his gaze. The fines will be erased, the violation removed, and new guidelines will be written. Not just for him, Grizzly rumbled, for everyone. No more smashing doors, no more threats. You respect the people you claim to serve, or we'll be back. The words hung in the air like a sentence. The board nodded quickly, scrambling to write notes, desperate to escape the weight pressing down on them. The room that had once felt like their fortress now felt like a cage. Jacob stood, sliding the violation slip back into his pocket. He looked at each face around the table, holding their gaze until they dropped their eyes. Remember this, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who had stood in fire and walked out alive. You can't break a man by breaking his door, not when he has brothers. With that, the SEALs rose together. Their chairs scraped against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. They walked out without another word, leaving the board sitting pale and silent, their empire of fear crumbling around them. The drive back from the HOA headquarters was quiet. The men didn't need to speak. They had done what needed to be done. The board had folded, the fines erased, and promises made. But for Jacob, the victory wasn't in paperwork or rules. It was in the way his brothers had stood with him, the way they had turned humiliation into strength. When the trucks rolled back into his neighborhood, curtains twitched again. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, waiting to see what would happen. But this time Jacob didn't feel their eyes like knives. He didn't feel small. He walked with his head high, his shoulders back, and his brothers at his side. His house still bore the scars of the invasion, the broken door frame, the splintered wood scattered across the porch. But now those scars didn't feel like wounds. They felt like reminders. Reminders that even when the world tried to strip him of dignity, he wasn't alone. The men helped him carry supplies into the house. Grizzly lifted the new door like it weighed nothing. Blaze brought in the tools. Doc checked the hinges while Echo secured the locks. They worked with the same rhythm they had once used to set up camp in deserts and jungles, fast, efficient, side by side. By evening, the door stood, strong again, stronger than before. Jacob leaned against the porch railing, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Max lay at his feet, finally calm, his tail thumping softly against the wood. The men gathered around him, tired but smiling. For a while, they just sat there, sharing silence the way only brothers could. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of trust, respect, and love that no distance could break. Finally, Echo broke the quiet. So, he said with a grin, you gonna keep calling us every time your trash bin's out too long? The group laughed, the sound rolling through the street like thunder. Even Jacob laughed, a real laugh this time, not forced, not bitter. Nah, Jacob said, shaking his head. I think they got the message. Grizzly clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him forward. Damn right they did. The laughter faded into a comfortable stillness. One by one, the men stood, giving Jacob long, firm handshakes that always ended in quick embraces. Promises were exchanged. Calls, visits, a reunion soon. They had their own lives now, their own battles, but Jacob knew that if he ever needed them again, they'd come. No questions asked. As the last truck pulled away, Jacob stood alone on his porch, Max at his side. The street was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow silence of fear, but the gentle peace he had once dreamed of. He sat down on the steps, running his hand through Max's fur. His eyes moved across the neighborhood, the same houses, the same lawns, the same fences. But tonight they looked different, not like cages, not like traps, but simply homes. For the first time since the invasion, Jacob felt like he belonged again. Not because the HOA had surrendered, not because the fines were gone, but because he had remembered who he was, a warrior, a brother, a man who had fought for peace and who deserved peace in return. His phone buzzed. A message from Grizzly. "You good now?" Jacob smiled softly. He typed back, "Yeah. For the first time in a long time, I'm home." He set the phone down, leaned back and let the cool evening air wash over him. Max rested his head on Jacob's knee, and Jacob whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Home, finally." And in that moment, with the stars beginning to appear above and the sound of crickets in the distance, Jacob felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Real peace.